Will you send a servant to my house with a letter for her?" Nick Kendall agreed. As I was leaving, I saw Louise. "I can't stop," I said at once. "I have come on business." Louise looked at me coldly. "And how is Mrs. Ashley?" she asked. "Well and happy," I answered. "She is very busy in the garden today." "I am surprised that you are not helping her," Louise said. "I'm sure Mrs. Ashley can make you do exactly what she wants." Louise made me feel very angry, and I left the house without another word. I rode to the bank and gave them the letter. I didn't get home until nearly 4 o'clock. I did not see my cousin Rachel. I rang the bell for Seacombe. He told me that Mrs. Ashley had worked in the gardens until 3 o'clock. Then she had asked for water for a bath. I decided to take a bath too, and I asked for an early dinner. Later, I went to my cousin Rachel's sitting room. I was feeling very happy. She was sitting on a stool by the fire. She had washed her hair, and she was drying it. "Come and sit down," she said. "Why are you staring at me? Have you never seen a woman brushing her hair before? Wait here, while I go and change my dress for dinner." My cousin Rachel was in her bedroom when Seacombe came in with the letter from my godfather. I stood up, feeling awkward. There was no sound from the bedroom as my cousin Rachel read the letter. Then suddenly, she came out of the room. She looked very angry. "You made Mr. Kendall write this letter," she said. "Did you think I was asking you for money? I am angry and ashamed." "Ashamed?" I repeated. "I would be ashamed if Mrs. Ambrose Ashley had to give Italian lessons. What would people think of Ambrose? The money is yours. Take it." I was angry now. We stood staring at each other. Then my cousin Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She turned, went quickly into her bedroom, and shut the door loudly. That night, I had dinner alone. Is that how women behaved? Did they always cry when they were angry? Thank God I had no wife. Poor Ambrose. No wonder he had been unhappy. I knew I would never marry now. After dinner, I read, and then fell asleep in my chair. When I woke up, it was time to go upstairs to my room. On the table by my bed was a note from my cousin Rachel. "Dear Philip, please forgive me for my rudeness. I have written to Mr. Kendall thanking him for his letter. I thank you too. Rachel." The door to her sitting room was open. I walked straight through and knocked on the bedroom door. The room was in darkness, but I could see my cousin Rachel in bed. "I want to thank you for your note and say good night," I said. "I'm sorry I made you angry. I did not want you to cry." "I cried because of what you said about Ambrose," she said. "I will take the money, Philip, but after this week, I must go." "But I thought you liked it here," I said. "You seemed so happy, working in the garden. You have a home here. If Ambrose had made another will, this would have been your home." "Oh, God!" she cried. "Why do you think I came?" I looked down at her. She looked very young, very alone. "I don't know why you came," I said. "But I know Ambrose would have wished you to stay, perhaps to plan the gardens." "Very well, I'll stay for a time," she said. "Then you aren't angry with me anymore." "I was never angry with you, Philip, but you are sometimes very stupid. Come closer." As I bent down, she took my face between her hands and kissed me. "Now go to bed like a good boy and sleep well," she said. I moved to the door like a man in a dream. When I was back in my room, I wrote a short note to Nick Kendall. I told him that my cousin Rachel would take the money. Then I walked down to the hall to put my letter in the post bag. In the morning, Seacom would arrange for the letters to be delivered. There were 2 letters in the bag. Both had been written by my cousin Rachel. One was addressed to my godfather, Nick Kendall. The other was addressed to Signor Rinaldi in Florence. I stared at it before putting it back in the bag. Why had my cousin Rachel written to Signor Rinaldi? What did she have to tell him? Chapter 9. We open Ambrose's boxes. Now it was October, but the weather was fine, and my cousin Rachel was able to work in the garden. We also had time to visit the tenants on the estate. They all loved my cousin Rachel. When they were ill, she gave them medicines made from herbs. Sometimes in the afternoons, our neighbors came to the house. Sometimes my cousin Rachel went to visit them. I enjoyed listening to her at dinner. My cousin Rachel told me about the people she had seen during the day. She always made me laugh. But at the end of the month, the weather changed. Rain fell every day. There was no gardening and no visiting. One morning, my cousin Rachel and I were standing at the library window. Outside, the rain was falling heavily. Then Seacom reminded us about Ambrose's boxes. They were still in my room and had never been emptied. We began to open the boxes. The first box we opened was full of Ambrose's clothes. Suddenly, my cousin Rachel was crying. Then she was in my arms, her head against my chest. "Oh, Philip, I'm so sorry," she said. "But we both loved him so much." I moved my lips against her hair. "Don't worry, Rachel," I said. "I'll do this." It was the first time I had called her by her name. She stopped crying, and we continued to unpack the boxes. We decided to give Ambrose's clothes to the tenants on the estate. Then we began to look at the books. As I opened a book on gardening, a piece of paper fell out. It looked like part of a letter, written by Ambrose. "She cannot stop spending money," I read. "It is like an illness. If this goes on, my dear Philip, she will spend everything. You must tell Kendall in case." "What have you there?" my cousin Rachel said suddenly. "That is Ambrose's writing." "It's nothing," I said, and threw the piece of paper on the fire. We continued our work in silence. That same morning, some boxes had arrived for my cousin Rachel from London. New dresses, perhaps. I remembered the words in Ambrose's letter. "It is like an illness. She will spend everything." After dinner, when we went to the library as usual, the most beautiful blue and gold cloth lay over the chairs. "Do you like it, Philip?" my cousin Rachel asked. "It's Italian. It will make beautiful curtains for your room." "Isn't it very expensive?" I asked. "Well, yes, but that isn't important. If you like it, take it, as a present from me." I thought unhappily about the letter, but I could say nothing. As we sat by the fire, my cousin Rachel began talking about her life in Italy. She spoke of the time before she had met Ambrose. I was listening with the greatest interest when she suddenly said, "What was on that paper you threw in the fire, Philip?" "It was from a letter," I said. "Ambrose was worried about money. I can't remember exactly." The worried look went from Rachel's eyes. "Was that all?" she said. Poor Ambrose. He did not understand life in Italy. He thought I spent too much money. He was very generous until he became ill. Then he changed so much." "How did he change?" I asked. "When I wanted money for the house, he became very angry. In the end, I had to ask Rinaldi for money to pay the servants. When Ambrose found out, he refused to have Rinaldi in the house. It was a terrible time. I did not want to tell you about it, Philip. Ambrose was so ill. He trusted no one. You wouldn't have known him." "That is all over now," I said. "Don't make yourself unhappy. You cannot bring Ambrose back. This is your home now." My cousin Rachel looked into my eyes. "You are so like him," she said. "Sometimes I am afraid. You must not change too." I took her hands in mine. "I will never change," I said. "And we must remember Ambrose as he used to be. This house belongs to all three of us now." "You are very good to me, Philip," my cousin Rachel said as she moved to the door. "I hope that one day you will be as happy as I was with Ambrose at the beginning." She went to bed, and I sat alone by the library fire. My terrible jealousy had returned, but now I was jealous of Ambrose. I was jealous because of the love that my cousin Rachel had given him. Chapter 10: A Christmas Present. In the past, I had always disliked the winter, but with my cousin Rachel in the house, things were very different. When I was with my cousin Rachel, I was happy. When she was away from the house, I was bored. Life was dull and uninteresting until she returned. Like everyone else, I now thought that my cousin Rachel was beautiful. Whenever she came into a room, she made it a happier, more interesting place. In the evenings, we sat together in her small sitting room. We drank tisana as she and Ambrose had done in Florence. The evenings were the best times. But when I went to my room, I could not sleep. Any day, perhaps, my cousin Rachel would decide to go to London. If she left me, I would feel terribly alone. When Ambrose had been at home, he had always given dinner to the tenants on Christmas Eve. This year, I decided to do the same. My cousin Rachel was very pleased. At once, she began to make preparations. Packages arrived from London, presents perhaps. She began to plan the Christmas meal. One thing worried me. What could I give my cousin Rachel for a present? I thought about it for a long time, and at last I had an idea. I remembered the jewels that belonged to my family. They were kept in the bank for safety. In 3 months' time, on my birthday, they would be mine. But I did not want to wait that long, and I remembered that Nick Kendall had gone to London. I went to the bank that day and asked the manager to show me the Ashley jewels. They were very beautiful, blue, green, and red. But my cousin Rachel always wore black. She could not wear colored jewels with mourning clothes. Then I saw the collar of pearls. How beautiful the white pearls would look on my cousin Rachel's neck. "Your mother was the last woman to wear this collar," the manager said. "All the brides of the Ashley family wear it on their wedding day." I put out my hand and took the collar. "I will take this with me," I said. The manager looked worried. "The pearls are not yours until the 1st of April, he said. "I don't think Mr. Kendall would like you to take them away." "I'll speak to Mr. Kendall," I said. I put the collar in its box and stood up. I knew the pearls were the right present for my cousin Rachel. I felt very excited. Then, at last, it was Christmas Eve. Seacombe had brought a tree into the house and had decorated it as usual. Dinner was to start at 5. After dinner, everybody would have a present. This year, my cousin Rachel was going to give out the presents with me. Before I dressed for dinner, I sent the collar of pearls to her room. With it was a note. My mother was the last woman to wear this. Now it belongs to you. I want you to wear it tonight and always. Philip. When I was ready, I went downstairs and waited for my cousin Rachel. She came in slowly. Her dress was black, but it was one I had not seen before. The collar of pearls was round her neck. I had never seen her look so happy or so beautiful. She put her arms around me and then she kissed me. She kissed me not as a cousin, but as a lover. This is what Ambrose died for, I thought. And for this I would happily die too. She gave me her hand and we walked in to dinner. At first, I thought this was going to be the happiest evening of my life. I remember the food, the noise and the excitement. My cousin Rachel had bought everyone a small present, carefully chosen. Mine was a gold chain for my keys, with our initials, R.A.R.A. hanging from it. Our plates and glasses were filled, emptied and filled again. Then we gave everyone a present from the tree. When dinner was over, I spoke to my godfather, Nick Kendall, for the first time that evening. "Good evening, sir, and Happy Christmas," I said. Nick Kendall looked angry, and he said nothing. He was staring at the collar of pearls around my cousin's neck. Then at last, the tenants had all left. Louise and my cousin Rachel went upstairs, and I found myself alone with my godfather. "I have some bad news from the bank," he said. "The manager tells me that Mrs. Ashley is already several £100 overdrawn. I don't understand it. She must be sending money back to Italy." "She is very generous," I said. "And there were debts in Florence, I think. You must give Mrs. Ashley more money." Nick Kendall looked unhappy. "There is something else, Philip," he said. "You should not have taken that collar of pearls. It is not yours." "It will be mine in 3 months' time," I said quickly. "My cousin Rachel will take good care of it." "I am not so sure," Nick Kendall said. "I have been hearing stories about Mrs. Ashley and her first husband. They were both well known for their bad lives. They spent money carelessly." "That can't be true," I cried. "True or not," my godfather replied, "I'm afraid that collar must go back to the bank. But I gave it to my cousin Rachel as a present. She has a right to wear the collar." "Only if Ambrose had lived," Nick Kendall said. "That collar of pearls is worn by the Ashley brides, no one else. If you do not ask Mrs. Ashley to give it back, I will." Then suddenly, my cousin Rachel and Louise were in the room. "You are quite right, Mr. Kendall," my cousin Rachel said. "I was very proud to wear the collar, and now I shall give it back." And she took off the collar and gave it to my godfather. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashley," he said. "And now Louise and I must go. We wish you both a happy Christmas." When they had gone, my cousin Rachel held out her arms. I went up to her. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Everything has gone wrong. My mother wore those pearls on her wedding day. That is why I wanted you to have them. Don't you understand?" "Of course I do, Philip dear," she said. "If Ambrose and I had been married here, He would have given them to me on my wedding day. I said nothing. My cousin Rachel had not understood. I was thinking of another wedding day, a wedding day in the future. Chapter 11. Rinaldi Again. The new year began, and my birthday, on 1st April, was 3 months away. How I wanted to have control of my own money. I was tired of Nick Kendall being my guardian. However, I could spend money on the house. I decided to make it beautiful for Rachel. There were many repairs to be done. From January, I had nearly 20 men working for me. The bills for the work were sent to my godfather. Rachel and I had many plans for the gardens, too. Work had started on a sunken water garden. We had found the design for the water garden in one of Rachel's books. Because there were so many workmen in the house, we could not have visitors. My cousin Rachel and I stayed quietly at home, and I was very happy. I loved to watch Rachel move about the house. I loved to hear her voice. When her hands touched me, my heart beat faster. The first days of spring came, and the sun shone. Then something happened which took all my happiness away again. I had kept one of Ambrose's old coats to wear myself. One day, as I was walking in the woods, I felt something in a pocket. It was another letter from Ambrose. I was pleased that I was alone. I walked on until I reached the highest place on the estate. Ambrose had always loved to sit there. I sat down and held the letter in my hands. I did not want to open it. I was afraid that Ambrose had written something bad about Rachel. We were so happy together now that I wanted to forget the past. But at last, I opened the letter. It had been written 3 months before his death, but he had never posted it. My cousin Rachel, Ambrose wrote, had been expecting a child, but it had died. The doctors told her that she could never have another child. At first, Rachel was quiet and unhappy. Then she began to spend money carelessly. Ambrose suspected that Rinaldi was in love with her. For these reasons, Ambrose had not signed his new will, in which he left everything to Rachel. Ambrose also wrote about his terrible headaches. He told me about the fever, which at first made him violent. Then it made him very weak. Ambrose was very unhappy, and he had written, "You are the only person who can help me, Philip. Are Rachel and Rinaldi trying to poison me for my money? I must know." I hid the terrible letter under a large stone and walked slowly back to the house. I could not forget Ambrose's words. But I decided that Rachel must never know about the letter. In 3 weeks' time, the estate and all the money would be mine. But this was not right. Ambrose had made a new will, but he had not signed it because of his illness. His money belonged to Rachel. She must have it. That night, I asked Rachel about Ambrose's will. She showed me a copy of it, which I read carefully. Everything had been left to Rachel. Then if she had died without children, everything was to be mine. Why did Ambrose not sign this will? I asked. Tell me, Rachel. I don't know, she answered quietly. Perhaps when he knew we could not have children, his feelings changed. Perhaps it was only a mistake. But when the headaches started, Ambrose suspected me of terrible things. I can't speak about that time. Please leave me alone, Philip. I can't answer any more questions." "I have reasons for my questions," I said. "You will understand in 3 weeks' time." By the following morning, I had made up my mind. I rode into the town and, with the help of a lawyer, wrote out a document. In 3 weeks' time, all my property would be given to Mrs. Rachel Ashley. The jewels would belong to her too, but she would not be able to sell the house or the land. "I have one question," the lawyer said. "Mrs. Ashley is quite a young woman. What will happen to the property if she marries again?" I thought for a moment. The house and the estate must always belong to the Ashleys. "If she marries," I said, "or if she dies, the property becomes mine again. That must be made clear." I told the lawyer that the document must be kept secret. He promised to send me a copy on the last day of March. I felt very happy as I rode home. My dear Rachel would never leave me now. We would live in perfect happiness forever. When I reached the house, I heard voices in the library. The door opened and Rachel came out, laughing happily. "Come and see my visitor, Philip," she cried. "He has come a long way to see us both." The man stood up and held out his hand. It was Rinaldi. We stood there looking at each other. Then Rinaldi began talking about his journey. Rachel suggested that he should stay in the house for a few days. I could say nothing. During dinner, Rachel and Rinaldi talked about people and places I knew nothing about. Often they spoke in Italian, and I could not understand a word. At last, Rachel stood up and said, "You must excuse us, Philip. Rinaldi and I have some business to discuss. He has brought papers I must sign." They went upstairs, and I walked alone in the gardens. I felt cold and unhappy. I stayed outside until the light went out in Rinaldi's room. I had just reached my own room when there was a quiet knock on my door. "I came to wish you good night," my cousin Rachel said. "Why didn't you come and drink tisana with us, Philip? You must make Rinaldi welcome. He is a very old friend of mine." Rinaldi stayed with us for 7 days. As he laughed and talked with Rachel, I began to hate him. When it was time for Rinaldi to leave, he took my cousin Rachel's hand and kissed it. "Write and tell me your plans," he said. "I shall be in London for some time." "I am making no plans until after the 1st of April, Rachel replied with a laugh. Rinaldi smiled. "I hope Philip enjoys his birthday," he said. "1st April is All Fool's Day, isn't it? But perhaps Philip doesn't want to remember that." When Rinaldi had gone, Rachel smiled at me. "You have been very good, Philip," she said. "Are you glad we are alone again?" Chapter 12. All Fool's Day. As my birthday came nearer, I became more and more excited. Rachel laughed at me. "You are like a child," she said. "What plans are you making for the day?" But I had made no plans. All I wanted was that Rachel should know about the document. And one more thing, Rachel should have all the family jewels. I went to the bank myself. I brought them back to the house and hid them in my room. On the last day of March, I rode over to Nick Kendall. First, I handed him a copy of Ambrose's will. My godfather looked at it carefully. "I don't understand why Ambrose didn't sign it," he said. "But we have done all we can for Mrs. Ashley." "I don't agree," I said. "I want to make everything right." And I handed him a copy of the document the lawyer had prepared. "Read this," I said. "And remember that my cousin Rachel knows nothing about it." "I wish Signor Reynaldi had seen this," Nick Kendall said slowly. "He told me how careless Mrs. Ashley is with money. This document of yours gives her great power over the property. I have to ask you one question, Philip. Are you in love with Mrs. Ashley?" My face went red. "I am only doing what Ambrose wanted," I said. "Perhaps," Nick Kendall answered. "But people are talking. Mrs. Ashley should leave, get married again. She might marry you if you asked her." "I am sure she would not," I said. Nick Kendall watched me sadly as I signed my name on the document. "There are some women who bring sadness to all those who love them," he said. "They cannot help it. I think Mrs. Ashley is one of those women." The sun was setting as I rode home. I bathed, changed my clothes, and went into the dining room. Rachel wanted to know where I had been, but I laughed and told her nothing. After dinner, I was too excited to sit still. I walked down to the sea. There was a moon, and the night was warm. I took off my clothes, and for a few minutes I swam in the ice-cold water. When I got back to the house, it was 5 minutes to 12. I could not wait any longer. I stood under Rachel's window and called her name. When she looked out, I said, "I have something for you, Rachel." Then I ran to my room for the jewels. "I want you to have these now," I said. "Listen, the clock is striking 12 and it is the 1st of April. I am 25 and I can do what I like." I put the document on her table and began to open the boxes of jewels. Rachel's eyes opened wide in surprise, and suddenly we were laughing together. I put the pearl collar round her neck. As I looked at her, I remembered the other Ashley women who had worn it. "You have given me so much," Rachel said at last. "I have only a small present for you. What else can I give you? Tell me." "There is one thing," I said. I looked into her dark eyes. They shone very brightly in the candlelight. She laughed softly and blew out the candle. We were alone in the darkness. I did not leave her room until sunrise. Happiness had come to me at last. Rachel accepted me and my love. She was the first woman I ever loved, and she was the last. I remember walking alone in the garden as the birds began to sing. Rachel and I would be always together now, day after day, night after night, for all our lives. I went back to my room and slept. After breakfast, I went into the garden again. I picked the most beautiful flowers I could find. Rachel was in bed, eating her breakfast. I threw the flowers on the bed in front of her. "Good morning, again," I said. "I have come to say one thing. I love you." Rachel looked up at me without smiling. "You should not come into my room so early," she said. "The servants will talk." I smiled but said nothing. I went downstairs. I wanted to tell the servants that Rachel and I were going to be married. Then I decided that we would tell them together, later. I walked in the gardens until it was time for Rachel to leave her room. The day was fine, and I decided we should go out riding. But when I got back to the house, Rachel had already left. I waited for a long time, but she did not return. At last, I walked along the road hoping to meet her. When I saw the carriage, I stopped it. I got in and sat down beside Rachel. She was wearing a veil and I could not see her face. "Where have you been?" I asked her. "To see your godfather." "You cannot change anything," I told her. "I am 25, Everything I have is yours." "Yes, I understand that now," Rachel said, "but I wanted to be sure." Her voice was quiet. I did not think she was smiling. "Let me look at your face," I said. She lifted her veil. There was no love in her eyes now. "I think Louise was a little more friendly today," Rachel said. "She will make you a good wife. We made plans to meet in London together." I looked at her in surprise. It was unkind of her to make jokes about Louise. And why was Rachel talking about London? We had made no plans to go there. "Come into the woods, Rachel," I whispered. "I want to kiss you so much." She did not answer, but took something out of her bag. "Here is your present," she said, and she gave me a small gold pin for my tie. If I had known about the money, I would have bought something larger. As I dressed for dinner, I could think of only one thing. Money is the one way to please her. The one way to please her. When we sat down together for my birthday dinner, Rachel was wearing the pearl collar. We both drank wine, and I started to feel happier. Time would soon pass. When the morning time was over, Rachel would be my wife. While we were sitting at the table, the Kendalls came into the room. When they had wished me a happy birthday, I stood up, my glass in my hand. "From this morning, I have been the happiest of men," I said. "I want you to be the first to know. Rachel has promised to be my wife." I smiled at them all, but Rachel's face was hard and cold. "Have you gone mad, Philip?" she said. She looked at the Kendalls. "You must forgive him. He has drunk too much wine. I'm sure he will apologize." Rachel got up, and the others followed her out of the room. I stood without moving until I heard them leave the house. When Rachel came back, we stared at each other without speaking. Then Rachel said, "You had better go to bed, Philip, before you say any more foolish things." "Foolish?" I repeated. "But last night—" "Surely you love me, Rachel. Last night you proved that you loved me. It was a promise of marriage." "No, Philip, I had no thought of marriage. I was thanking you for the jewels, that was all. There was no love." I looked at her hard, cold face. I began to understand what Ambrose had suffered. She had everything. What else could I do? Suddenly I wanted to frighten her, to show her my strength. I put my hands round her neck and looked into her eyes. "Will you marry me now?" I whispered. Her dark eyes were full of fear, but she did not speak. I loosened my fingers. There were red marks on her white skin. Rachel turned and went upstairs. I followed her, but she was too quick for me. She closed her door and locked it. As she stood there, I saw myself in a mirror on the wall. There I stood, tall, awkward, white-faced. But was it myself or Ambrose standing there? As I lay in bed, I heard the clock strike midnight. All Fool's Day was over. Chapter 13. Louise and laburnum trees. When I went down to breakfast in the morning, there was a note for me on the table. It was not from Rachel, but from Louise. "Dear Philip, I was sorry for you last night. If you want a friend to talk to, please let me know. Louise." At first I did not want to see Louise, but I had not slept all night and I was very unhappy. Louise knew me well. I sent her a note asking her to meet me in the church that morning. "I have been worried about you for a long time," Louise told me. She has deceived you from the beginning." "I made a mistake," I said. "But Mrs. Ashley did not," Louise replied. "She came here to get the money. She stayed until she got it. That is all." "I don't believe you," I cried. "She came on impulse. She stayed because she was happy here." "No, she had a plan," Louise replied. "She has been sending money back to Italy all the winter. She waited until you were 25, but then you made her a present of everything. You made things easy for her." "I know you don't like Rachel," I said. "That is why you are saying these things. But I have asked her to marry me, and I shall go on asking her." "But she will never marry you," Louise said with a sad smile. "When you gave Mrs. Ashley the document, she went straight to my father. She asked him if everything now belonged to her. My father told her that that was true, but he warned her that if she married again, she would lose the money. She told him she had no plans to marry again." "But if she marries me, she will lose nothing," I said. "She would not be able to go back to Italy or send money there," Louise said quietly. She looked at me and said, "I will go now, Philip. I have upset you deeply. I am very sorry." As I rode home, the rain began to fall heavily. When I got back, I was cold and wet. There was a note from Rachel in my room. "I have asked Mary Pascoe to stay here with me. After last night, I cannot be alone with you again." Mary Pascoe, the vicar's daughter? Mary Pascoe was a large, plain girl. Rachel and I had often laughed about her. I could not believe it. But it was true. This was the punishment for my one moment of anger. Whenever I was with Rachel, Mary Pascoe was there too. Oh God, what had I done? By dinner time, I was feeling very ill. I went upstairs to my room. I got into bed and the sheets felt very cold. I hoped that Rachel would come to me, but she did not. In the morning, I tried to dress, but I was too weak. My neck was stiff and there was a terrible pain in my head. When I called for Seacombe, took one look at me and hurried out of the room. Then my cousin Rachel was there, her face very white. "I will not hurt you, Rachel," I said. "Please send Mary Pascoe home." "Don't talk now. Lie still," Rachel answered. Then the room was dark. The doctor came. I was hot, then cold. I called for Rachel, and she held my hand. "I am with you," she said. I closed my eyes. When I awoke, the room was full of light and warmth. How long had I been asleep? Rachel was sitting near my bed. I put my hand to my face. "I have grown a beard," I said. I began to laugh. At once, Rachel was holding a glass to my lips. She made me drink the bitter liquid. "Have you sent Mary Pascoe away?" I asked. Rachel looked surprised. "She went away 5 weeks ago," she answered. "You have been so ill that you nearly died. The doctors could not help you. Your strength and my medicines saved you." I lay there, with her hand in mine. I could not speak. 5 weeks had passed, and I could remember nothing. Only that Rachel and I had been married on the day before my birthday. We had kept our marriage a secret. But in 2 months' time, Rachel would be out of mourning, and we would be able to tell everyone. I was very weak for a long time, but the weather was good, and I was soon able to go into the garden. The workmen had been busy for many months. They had dug out the ground to make the sunken water garden. It was very deep, but it was not yet finished. Yellow flowers hung on the laburnum trees that Rachel had planted. I remembered the laburnum tree at the Villa Sangaleti and the green poisonous seeds lying under it. That evening, as Rachel and I were drinking our tisana, I said, "I heard something strange today. Seacombe told me you were going back to Florence. I thought you had sold the villa. No, I have enough money to keep it now. I shall probably stay there for the winter. Perhaps you could visit me in the spring." "Visit you?" I repeated. "But a husband should be with his wife always." Rachel sat very still. "Your wife?" "Oh God, Philip," she whispered. "What do you mean? We are not married." "But we are," I said. "I remember clearly." But as I spoke, the pain returned to my head. I suddenly knew that our marriage was a dream. "Why didn't you let me die?" I cried. "I cannot live here alone. I cannot." Looked at her face. "Give me a few weeks, only a few weeks," I said. She did not reply. Chapter 14. What is the truth? The summer came, but Rachel did not speak of leaving. I became stronger, but sometimes the terrible pain in my head came back, and I could not think clearly. But I told Rachel nothing about it. Then Rachel began to drive into the town 2 or 3 times a week. When I asked her about these visits, she told me that she had a lot of business to do. One day, when Rachel was busy at home, I rode into the town alone. It was Saturday, and the streets were full of people. As I walked slowly through the town, a man came out of an inn. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking up and down the street. It was Rinaldi. That evening, as Rachel was going up to her room after dinner, I stopped her. "How long has Rinaldi been in the town?" I asked. "Why is he here?" "Because he is my friend," Rachel answered. "I know you hate him and do not want him here. Ambrose was jealous of him. Are you too?" "Yes," I said. "I hate Rinaldi because he is in love with you. Send him away." "Certainly not," she said. "I need him. I will have him here if I wish. The house is mine." In my anger, I took a step towards her. "Don't touch me," she cried. "That is how Ambrose behaved. I can't suffer it again." I turned away. "If you want to see Rinaldi, ask him here," I said. "Don't go secretly into the town to meet him." And so Rinaldi came to stay in the house. He behaved politely, but I could not bear to see them together. They always spoke in Italian, and she looked at him all the time. Food seemed to have no taste now. The tisana I drank with them in the evenings tasted bitter. Then the fever returned again. I was sick and too weak to stand. I had to stay in bed for a few days. When I was better again, Rachel told me that Rinaldi had gone back to Italy. "When are you going there?" I asked. Rachel did not reply. A day or 2 later, a letter arrived for Rachel in Rinaldi's handwriting. As I drank tisana with Rachel that evening, I saw the letter on her desk. Was it a love letter? I had to know. That night when Rachel was in bed, I crept into her sitting room and searched the desk. The letter was not there. But in one small drawer, I found an envelope. Inside it were some small green seeds. They were laburnum seeds, poisonous to animals and to men. I put back the envelope and returned to my room. There were 2 bottles of medicine on the table. I poured the medicines out of the window. Then I went downstairs. The cups from which we had drunk our tisana had not been washed. Did the liquid in my cup have a bitter taste? I could not be sure. I went to bed and lay there thinking. I was not angry, but I was very unhappy. I remembered Ambrose's words. Are they trying to poison me? Rachel has won. I am dying. The following day was Sunday. Rachel and I went to church as usual. As she sat beside me, her face was calm and happy. I wished I could hate her, but I could not. After church, Rachel went to speak to Mary Pascoe. A workman came up to me and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Ashley, but I wanted to warn you. Don't walk on the new bridge over the sunken garden. It is not finished yet. Anyone walking on it would fall and break their neck." "Thank you," I said. "I will remember." At dinner, Rachel was kinder than she had been for a long time. She talked about Florence. She said she would look for a stone statue there to make a fountain for the sunken garden. She made tisana as usual, but I refused to drink it. I would never again drink anything she gave me. "But it is good for you, Philip," she said. "No," I said. "You drink it." "I have drunk mine already," Rachel said. "I will pour this away." We talked together for half an hour or so, and then Rachel said, "I think I shall walk for a little. I want to look at the sunken garden. Will you come with me, Philip?" I shook my head. "Take care, Rachel," I said. "Of what?" she answered with a smile. "There is no danger here, Philip." I sat by the window until it was almost dark. Rachel had not returned. At last, I ran out of the house and down to the sunken garden. The bridge was broken. My cousin Rachel lay on the ground below. I climbed down and held her hands in mine. They were cold. "Rachel," I said. She opened her eyes and I thought she knew me, but she called me Ambrose. I held her hands until she died. You know now who killed Rachel. But how did Ambrose die? Did Rachel kill him? I shall go on asking myself that question until the day I die. I live alone now. I am a young man, but I think only of the past. The two people I loved are dead. I have an empty life in front of me. That is my punishment, and it is worse than death.